Well, let's get this started. Thank you very much for coming here today. We're at the 11th IFSWF annual meeting, and it's gone, I think, very well from our perspective, and I hope from our host, APFC's perspective. We're going to keep this, I think, relatively informal in terms of how we're going to do it. I think we're just going to hear a few words from our host, Angela, and then a few words from the chair of IFSWF, Majed, and then we'll open it up for questions. So, yeah. Angela, if I can pass to you.
Sure. Thank you, Duncan, and thank you all for being here today to take questions and have this discussion. And I do want to thank IFSWF for agreeing to come to Juneau and have this meeting. It's been a really good meeting from my standpoint, and we get an opportunity to share so much information with each other. And it's really interesting. Somebody asked me how many times a year we meet, and we meet once a year. And it's this energy that comes together, and we realize we're not alone in the world. We're facing so many of the same issues, whether it's around the politics of our sovereign fund, whether it's where to invest, how to invest, what that time horizon needs to be, how to get better at what we do. And the relationships that we have here and being able to hear from our peers around the world about what is happening in their part of the world is so important. And for them to see, to have their boots on the ground in Juneau, to understand what it means for Alaska, to see how we work, what we're doing is just, it's priceless in my estimation. And I'm so glad and so thankful that you all have, that everybody was able to come and be a part of this up here.
On behalf of the forum, we'd really like to thank Alaska, City of Juneau, the fund for the hospitality, for bringing us all the way to this part of the world, one of the most beautiful places I've seen in my life. I was just commenting earlier, some of the most kind, most hospitable people I've seen in my life, including the protesters who are outside. And it's really something very special in a way. The forum itself is a place for meetings, place for collaborations and sharing of experiences, knowledge, and partnership. Some of the funds are much older than the others. Some of them face similar challenges, and sometimes the help is just a shout away. It's just dropping someone an email saying, okay, here is what we're doing, what have you done? And you will find the answer coming to you and within a few hours, instead of spending a lot of time, energy, trying to reinvent a wheel that was invented sometimes earlier. I think I have been trying to emphasize that partnership is an area for us to grow and develop. Some of us have access better than others. Some of us have knowledge, some partnership networks are different. So when we combine the network of the different members, we develop something much more powerful and much more effective in terms of getting our results. The statistics shows that the funds have been going more direct, doing things with other partners, and these things have been delivering better results overall for most of the funds. We hope to see more of this happening. We hopefully will see Alaska Fund benefiting from the other members and vice versa. We learned a lot from what they've been doing. Each one of the funds have different constraints, and these different constraints are dealt with differently, and that just generate a new and innovative way of solving problems. So I'm happy to be here, and on behalf of all the members, we'd like to thank the people of the state, the great people of the state, for their hospitality and for how they made us feel welcome. And maybe especially Tracy of the shack.
Great. Right, it's just questions now, if you have any. So just sort of ask away, and let's have a conversation.
Hi, Amanda White from Top 1000 Funds. Given the state of the global economy and low interest rates, low return environment, where are sovereign wealth funds generally? I know everyone has individual strategies, but where are they looking, and what's the role of them now, given the state of the world and the fact that there may very well be another storm coming? So what's the role of sovereign wealth funds, and where are you looking specifically for investments?
I can give general answer, not on the specific of any funds. But what we've seen, the trend is going toward private markets, moving toward alternative investments versus the liquid space. Partially, there is more alpha to be generated, and that increases the return. Alpha is basically the excess return available compared to what's available in the market. So we've seen people shift toward that. We've seen also people question the role of fixed income in their portfolio. Historically, in the last 30, 40 years, if you invested in fixed income, you generated a lot of return. It wasn't a low return environment. But right now, the role of fixed income or the government bonds have been questioned by some of the members. And as a result, different people are coming up with different solutions for this. We've seen the use of leverage increasing also in some of the fund that use not to use leverage. We've seen some of them are now saying, look, at this cost of borrowing, where it is right now, we might as well just go and borrow. If you follow the news, we've seen some of them go to Europe and borrow at a very low cost to fund their investment, enhance the returns on their investment. I would say that's what we're doing. In terms of the economy, global economy, I think one needs to differentiate between the news and what's happening. It's not in as bad shape as most people think. We've been hearing about the recession in the U.S. for a long time. And if it happens, someone will tell us, I told you so. If it doesn't happen, we'll forget about it. But in reality, the situation is not as bad as it is. Now, there is a storm that happens. What we tell people is, unless you invested one day before the storm and lost your money the next day, the storm will come and go. We encourage people to think of risk in a little bit more sophisticated way. Volatility by itself is one risk, and it's an important risk, but it's not the only risk. For those who've watched the market after global financial crisis, a lot of people thought that was the end of the world as we know it. Well, it wasn't the end of the world as we know it, and the world continued from there. So as a long-term investors, most of the sovereign wealth funds, I think, can handle some volatility. It's not something they can avoid, actually, even if you try, in most cases. We've seen people who try to avoid volatility end up generating very low returns. And someone has to ask 20 years from now, yes, we built a portfolio that did not lose money in a major crisis, and in the process we delivered 1% or 2% return. Would the stakeholder be happy in such circumstances? And we leave it to the people behind these funds, but most of them will not. Because ultimately, if you focus on your objective, you build a portfolio for it, you will face volatility, you will face some challenging environment. A well-built portfolio will go through these storms and become resilient to these problems. Angela, you want to maybe comment?
Thank you, Majed. And when I think about that question, I think about where we were 11 years ago as an organization starting off, and that the impetus for that was this need for transparency and understanding about what sovereign wealth funds were doing, what their activities were, and what was the motivations behind that. And we came together as IFSWF to create these principles of transparency and good governance. And from my standpoint, where we are now 11 years later, is that time horizon and that effort has created a lot of trust between the sovereign wealth funds. And I think it's very evident in the meetings that we've had here this week that there is a lot of respect and trust amongst all of us. And I think that creates an ability to create another platform now. And what should that platform look like? I don't know today, but I can tell you that as a board and as a membership, there's a lot of thought being put into whether or not now that platform has to expand beyond just the Santiago principles of transparency and potentially into other arenas, whether it's recognizing sovereign wealth fund influence, whether it's in job creation, in resource development, in climate change, in all of these volatile areas that we see on a regular basis. Are there commonalities that we want to link our arms together and get behind and put that reputation as IFSWF, as a group that has worked very hard to build up that trust and respect for each other, to then use that to take it to the next level. And I think that's what you'll see the membership discussing over the next few years. Not sure how it'll manifest itself or where it'll land, but I think it's a testament to all the work that was done 11 years ago that has provided such a great foundation that it allows us to have these really candid conversations about where we think sovereign wealth funds need to be invested, need to go, and recognize each other's limitations.
Next. Here we go.
Hello. Hi, Rob Kozlowski, Pensions and Investments. One of the things that you mentioned, Majed, was the working together. And we've seen certainly an uptick in joint ventures between sovereign wealth funds. Can you speak a little bit to whether there's a priority to do more joint ventures between sovereign wealth funds, and whether, how that might inform what Angela talked about in terms of going beyond the Santiago principles, like, how that is going to, first of all, will it help guard against volatility, and how do these joint ventures help your individual funds in terms of how they're going to approach investment management as we're heading toward, in many ways, an uncertain future? So.
Can I just check? Sorry, Rob.
Sure.
Have you got the data that we published and Majed referenced today? Just as a
not yet.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure we get you that data, so you've actually got some data on the issue of
Wonderful.
partnerships as well.
I think partnership is far more important in private markets than public markets. Public markets is easier to access, and for a lot of people, there is no need for partnership in that sense. But it's one of the funds I mentioned earlier today was NIIF, the Indian Infrastructure Investment Fund, and it's set up by the Indian government. Right now, there are 4 or 5 sovereign wealth funds partnering with that fund to invest in Indian infrastructure, including renewable energy and affordable housing and so on. Commercially, you still make good returns on this investment. It's not political. It's not in any way motivated by other than good returns in India. It's an example where having such a fund in India as a sovereign wealth fund, member on this, we're networking together and we understand each other, and it's an opportunity for us to have access to a market which normally is not as easy to access for most organizations. I would say the same thing about if we think of the example, the Constellation Capital maybe is just an example of seeding new fund managers, where the skills of different funds join together and creating this force. One of the, for me personally, to come all the way to Alaska to learn about a fund that Alaska Fund created in Abu Dhabi. Can you believe it? It's like, what? Yep, that's what we have done. And it's an interesting approach, which is totally different than the way we look at our own region, actually, in a way. So it's sometimes it's sharing with experience. Sometimes just the starting point is different. What some of the funds are solving for is different. And when we meet, we can create these possibilities. The other thing, many of the investment risk management in different organizations requires diversification. And by pulling the resources together, we can invest in a diversified way without concentrating the risk, especially for the smaller funds, in all fairness. And that's what we hope to achieve. The third one is really part of the International Forum for Sovereign Wealth Fund membership is a development fund. They're not focused internationally as much as internally. And these are, we've seen many of them are in Africa. There will be a forum in Abu Dhabi in November focusing on investment in Africa, where we're inviting all these sovereign wealth funds from Africa, plus other international sovereign wealth funds and private sector investors to come together and see what can be done in terms of partnership. And hopefully, because they're government related, they're focusing the priorities. If we can work together to allocate their investment to where there's a good social impact, there's a good economical impact in these countries, that will be something of value to everyone.
Yeah, Angela, you've got some of the most interesting partnerships going. So what's driven that?
You know, from our standpoint, it really is the limited resources we have here in Juneau, in Alaska, and trying to figure out how to leverage our relationships, our knowledge, what we can bring, and figure out how to make that happen. And our fund is $65 billion. It falls somewhere probably in the bottom 50 percentile of fund size in compared to some of our sovereign wealth peers. And it means that we can't make those really big investments. So we have to be a little bit more creative and a little more just think about these things differently. And, you know, one of the things Majed said about, you know, like I had to come to Alaska to learn about an investment that started in Abu Dhabi, but it points out that sometimes we can be really blinded to the opportunities that exist in our own until we get outside and see it from another fund's perspective and what they see as the opportunity versus what you see as the opportunity, and really taking advantage of that and learning about it. And so for us, it's really been necessary in order to be able to grow the fund, deliver the returns Alaskans expect, and do it with our really limited resources.
Good stuff. What next? Yeah.
Ben Hohenstedt, Juneau Empire. It seemed like disruption was one of this morning's buzzwords. And keep in mind, I write for a general audience, so I think they understand what disruption means in context of a rideshare service. But what does it mean for sovereign wealth funds, and how did that shape the last couple days of conversation?
I'll start with that one. It means exactly that, right? So you think about rideshare and how it disrupted taxis, how it disrupts how you think about car ownership, and how do you then invest? Do you invest in Ford Motor Company? Do you invest in a tech company? Do you invest in battery manufacturer? Do you do all three? Like, how do you have to think about that if that is the future of the world, where technological disruption is going to come in and no longer allow what we might think of as traditional exchanges, transactions, to be done in a way that they always were? And what is that impact on the portfolio, and how do you think about it? So it's exactly, Ben, what you describe it as, and really trying to understand and learn from each other about how to think about it and how to think about it from a risk standpoint. So what is not just the upside, how much money can we make, but how much money are we going to potentially lose because companies aren't positioning themselves in a proper way?
I would add also, I started my career as an equity analyst. And if I'm to do my job today, same job I did 25 years, I think the technology and the big data available to us and the analytics and all these things are different today. without mentioning names, some of the best performing fund managers in the world today are organizations that call themselves technology companies. They don't call themselves investment management. Actually, they came from a technology background, and the whole thing was built on technology. So if we think of artificial intelligence today, and we think of it 5 years, 10 years from now, what we do as people in the investment organizations will change. The quality of the people, the skills of the people will be totally different than what it is today. So one of the challenges we're trying to find solution for, and we discussed it together, was what does the organization, the investment organization of the future look like in a way. And then the more we look at it, the more we're convinced we are that it's not going to look like the organization as we know it today. One can outsource some of these to external managers, but there's the core of the job that you do, Angela, for example, asset allocation and all these things. There's a new technologies coming that replace the approach we're taking. The people will be around. I think something like augmented intelligence, where you combine artificial intelligence with the experience of the people, is something that will change the way we do things. And we see it today. It's not like it's something in the future, but we see it with a very few organizations that are like on the cutting edge of the disruption of the model. We've seen, for example, the index fund or ETF comes and changed the market in a significant way for the incumbent 10 years ago. There's another wave coming most probably, and organizations like ours with long-term horizon need to think about it, because we're not used to moving very fast, or that's a disadvantage of being a very long-term investor in a way. Thank you.
Good. Do we have any more?
There's been some chatter about Norges Bank not being here, and I'm wondering, as you grow and all of these new funds become members, how do you cater for everybody? You know, ARDI is obviously significantly further along the organisational evolution chain than a startup development fund from Africa. So how do you cater for everybody as an organisation?
I think it's one of these trade-offs we have to make between inclusiveness and I don't want to call it specialization, but focusing on the similarities or the differences. And the choice we made as a board the last few years, let's focus on inclusiveness. We are different, but if we can partner, then we complement each other. NIF is new development fund focused on building infrastructure in India. ADI is one of the largest and one of the oldest sovereign wealth fund in the world, and we are partner in India in a way. So there is a way to combine both. And then when we come together, the dialogue is different. Sometimes there is shared areas, sometimes not. So what we've seen when they come here, they congregate differently also. There are times where the similar funds are connecting together, learning from each other differently than the big events. That's how we see it. Duncan, Angela, anything?
I was just going to add the Santiago principles, the sort of the bedrock, and they remain the bedrock. So all members sign up to the Santiago principles and complete self-assessments on those, and so those standards of governance remain as important as when they were created 11 years ago.
I don't really have anything to add.
I'm just a bit conscious of time because you need to open the next session. So and I don't want to force it to a close, but if we've got any more, maybe perhaps that's the last one more, if you have it.
Great.
Okay, well then let's draw it to a close, give Angela some time so she can get ready for the next session. Thank you all very much indeed. And well, we'll see you soon, and we'll probably see you sort of a bit later on, I would imagine, as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.